veteran born in Chicago and now living in an Elmhurst retirement community with his wife. They have 3 sons and 4 grandchildren. He holds degrees in electrical engineering and mathematics from the Illinois Institute of Technology, and he worked for the International Harvester and Borg-Warner corporations, mostly as an industrial engineer, a so-called efficiency expert, an idea which always caused his wife to laugh. Late in his life, he's been cajoled, threatened, and forced by his grandchildren to write a war memoir. Please join me in welcoming to the stage, Mr. Marvin Sussman!
D'abord, je dois m'excuser parce que Scott, ma première interprompteur qui n'est pas arrivé. Et ça n'arrive jamais quand même. Alors, je dois dire, au lieu de réciter avec ma voix, did anybody understand what
We're not here tomorrow.
Your 2 years of high school French are not a complete waste. With the dictionary, you can read Maupassant very well. It's delicious and you'll enjoy it. So don't worry about it. What I did say is that Scott promised me a teleprompter and it never comes. And, so I have to excuse myself for having to read this thing. I can do Casey at the Bat if you want to hear it. I did Mark Anthony in high school for that, which is a kind of a long part. Anyway, we'll get going. So why was I able to translate the French language for A Troop, 4th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron? Because in England, several months before D-Day, Sergeant McDermott ordered me and a few other A Troopers to learn French. Apparently, our scores on the General Classification Test and Aptitude Test were high enough to warrant confidence that over the next few months before D-Day, our brains could absorb enough of the language to be useful. Training materials included a portable 78 RPM phonograph record player, headphones, and a crank handle for winding up the spring-powered motor. There was a set of 15 Bakelite records, a lesson textbook, a grammar manual, and a French-English dictionary. There were 30 lessons, one on each side of a record. The voices followed the textbook. The idea was to understand and imitate the text. On each succeeding record, the voices spoke faster than on the previous one. Eventually, voices spoke at a fast clip, which is really fast for a learner. The recorded voices belonged to professors at the Sorbonne University of Paris. Frankly, I fell in love with the French language. If I could make sounds like that, mademoiselles would swoon. Inspired by such visions, I did my best. The schedule provided for 2 hours of study in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, which I added 2 more evening hours. Unfortunately, sometime after D-Day, on meeting my first Frenchman, I was dismayed to find that he was not a Sorbonne professor and that his rapid colloquial rural French, spoken with lips closed like a ventriloquist, was Greek to me. I quickly learned to slow them down with, "Monsieur, s'il vous plaît, plus lentement, plus lentement." They were rarely long enough for me. Nevertheless, my French, with enough pleading for lenteur, was good enough. Good enough to ask a farmer how recently he had seen any bush or schlup, slurs denoting Germans. But also good enough to ask the farmer for Calvados, the local apple brandy, and a trade for cigarettes. They were always generous with this stuff, although the grade was only like good old American Applejack. They kept the 30-year-old stuff hidden. But Applejack was good enough for my sergeant, Harvey Olson, who regarded the beverage as a necessity, unfortunately not provided by the U.S. Army. One of the first combat duties of the squadron was protecting the left flank of the 9th Infantry Division from surprises as it advanced from Utah Beach to the other side of the peninsula. We looked for Germans by poking around, starting sometimes at dawn. Sergeant Olson would typically form a foot patrol by pointing to individuals in the platoon while saying, you, and you too, Sussman. So it was not the Lord, but Sussman who would provide Ole with Calvados on every foot patrol. Whatever happened on a patrol, we almost always came back with a half-filled wine bottle. As much as I wanted to avoid patrol duty, I really did like talking to Norman farmers while Olson was sipping a small glass. Rarely as we crossed Normandy did I manage to meet mademoiselles who were probably hidden along with the 30-year-old Calvados. Those that I did meet never swooned. One sunny morning, about halfway across the Normandy Peninsula, where the hilly land was near its highest altitude, we did find trouble. The date was D+20, the end of June 1944. We, a four-man patrol led by Sergeant Olson, were walking toward the west through fallow meadows and started up a hill with a wide crest along which there was a growth of bushes. As we approached the crest of the hill, we spread out from left to right, crouching to crawl through the bushes and examine the landscape ahead of us. The first peak revealed an amazing sight. Ahead, the hill descended into an open field, a meadow fit for grazing. But instead of cows, we saw about 200 meters from us more than 50 German soldiers advancing toward us at a slow walk, spread out in one row from left to right, about 5 meters apart. They carried rifles across their chests, ready to be used. In the center of the line and about 10 meters in front of it, a commanding officer set the pace. What remained of a German infantry company was moving toward us, intending to climb up into our laps. We would have to move, soon. To explain the sight in front of us, I have to tell you something about tactics. When American infantry moves down a Normandy roadway, it proceeds in two columns, one on each side of the road, both in the same direction, with lots of space between men to minimize casualties under fire. With our air superiority, there was no danger from strafing. German infantry would do the same at night, but during daylight, that was not safe. If a P-47 or a Spitfire were to dive out of the clouds and strafe their column on a roadway, they would be hemmed in by roadside hedgerows, unable to escape bullets or napalm. So during the day, they preferred to travel in open fields where they could scramble in all directions. By traveling abreast, they were all a similar distance from any target before them and could concentrate their fire without hitting a friend. They had much more firepower than we had, but we did have an advantage over them. The sun was overhead behind us. To see us hidden in the brush, they would have had to look directly into the sun. They could only guess at the source of our rifle fire. Of course, we had no reason for firing. We were out to get information, not win the war. They were headed straight out of Normandy Peninsula. Maybe they thought they could go all the way to Germany, but more likely they were expecting to end up in a POW camp where they would finally get a meal. It was fascinating to watch them getting nearer, but time was working against us. None of us spoke until the captain was less than 100 meters away. Then, almost at once, three of us whispered, "Ole, we have to get out of here." Olson was silent for a few more seconds. Then he said, "Yes, but first I want to get the captain. Aim at his chest, but don't fire until you hear my shot." What an idea, an execution. All of us had sharpshooter medals, and all except me had been hunting since the age of 10. We were right at the hill crest in a kneeling position, rifles poised to fire, and could drop back below the hill crest in a few seconds after firing. We had to run back with a report in any case. Why not? As the captain started up the hill, it became obvious to us that Olson was going to wait until none of us could miss, until we could see the whites of his eyes. Harvey Olson was the coolest man alive. Before this day, I had fired at enemy soldiers at a distance, but they were moving rapidly, seeking cover, so there was no time to aim carefully. It was a matter of getting off as many shots as possible while trying to keep an eye on the target. And they would drop out of sight when fired at, so we seldom knew how effective our shots were. So there I was, for the first time, really aiming directly and carefully at a human being. An enemy, but still a human being. And I had time to think about my target. Maybe too much time. He appeared to be about 30, wore glasses, and was athletic enough to start up the hill without breaking stride. He probably graduated from university. He certainly had passed his Abitur exam to earn a German baccalaureate. He could easily be married, maybe with children. You could be thinking of them, or of Nietzsche. Yet, within a minute, he would be dead. These were my thoughts waiting for Olson's shot. But there were other thoughts. When I was about 10 years old, 1933, I saw a marvelous movie, All Quiet on the Western Front. It won 2 Oscars. Later, I read the popular book about World War I upon which the movie was based, a translation of a German book. It was a description of the grim life of a German infantry soldier during several years of the war. The German author had been wounded 5 times, so we know the description is accurate. In the story, the soldier, Paul Böhmer, had survived many artillery bombardments, gas attacks, and fierce hand-to-hand struggles with bayonets. Near the end of the war, on a day without a major battle, when there was nothing new on the Western Front, which is the meaning of the book's German title, Am besten nichts Neues, Paul Böhmer was killed. Recently, I read the book in the original German with the help of a dictionary because there was a lot of military slang. The English book I read as a 10-year-old was really cleaned up a lot. At the end of the movie, to portray the death of the soldier, which is not described at all in the book, we are shown a bright day over a green field. A butterfly lands on a flower near the soldier, who collected butterflies. While he reaches very slowly to capture the insect, the camera cuts to a French sniper taking aim with his telescopic sights. Then the camera shifts to a close-up showing only the hand moving slowly, very slowly toward the butterfly. As the hand moves, we see it jerk up slightly. Then we see the hand drop slowly to the ground as the butterfly, the symbol of life, flies away. And we know that Paul Böhmer is dead. You can see why the director got an Oscar. My memory of the movie as a 10-year-old, walking out of the dark Balvin and Katz Central Park Theater on Roosevelt Road in Chicago into the daylight, is that I really hated that French sniper. Yes, the French were our ally and the Germans our enemy, but by the end of the movie, audience sympathy was with the German soldier who only wanted to survive and go home. As the German officer climbed the hill, I thought of that French sniper. I was now that hated sniper. I was conflicted. If an enemy is charging toward you or shooting at you, you will fire at the enemy with a sense of fear or even panic. Then, emotionally, you know why you are pulling the trigger. But as a well-hidden sniper, you have no fear or panic. A sniper fires calmly at someone who is not an immediate threat to him. In this case, the Germans were perhaps hours away from a prison camp where they would be rendered harmless. This captain had gone through 5 years of war, and the war was almost over. If he got to a POW camp, he would go home to his family. He could pick up the pieces, have a career, maybe do something good. You could be a Nazi, but 2/3 of the Germans voted against Hitler in 1933. But he was appointed chancellor anyway. Later, German army officers tried to assassinate Hitler. Everybody, pro or con, gets dragged into a war. How can any individual be judged? I must admit that I was naive. I had read Goethe, Kant, Schopenhauer, Mann, and Kafka. I had great respect for German culture, at the top of science, math, music, and literature. This was June 1944, before the discovery of the death camps and other atrocities that the German army had watched in silence, if not participating. I looked at Germans as any other people now caught in a trap. Such naivety did not last the war, but it lasted through Normandy. So here I was, about to kill Paul Bremer. The only motivation for a sniper to kill is duty or hatred of the enemy, or both. Did I hate this Paul Bremer enough to keep him out of a POW camp? Maybe. Maybe not. Of course, his death was inevitable. I could easily miss him. Nobody would know, and my conscience would be clear. On the one hand, if I killed him, it would be in cold blood. There is something in human nature that instinctively rebels against killing a fellow human being in cold blood. I would be killing him like Cain killed Abel, like Genghis Khan. Killing one human in cold blood is morally no different than killing thousands. Did I waste my time reading Kant and Niebuhr? I wondered. On the other hand, a German officer could not surrender unless he ran out of ammunition, and that was not the case. So there was no way that Paul Bremer could be thought of as anything but a deadly enemy. In any case, I had an order and a duty to obey. So where does that leave the philosophers? They know nothing about the logic of war, no more than a 10-year-old, not in Normandy. So I had to overcome the instinct and aim well. The officer kept a steady pace uphill. I kept my sight on Paul Bremer's chest, following his movements. Olson waited until the captain was about 30 meters away. Home plate to second base, slowing his pace as the hill became steeper. Olson's shot rang out next to my ear. As I was squeezing the trigger, Paul Bremer moved away and was still only on the ground. Then within a second or two, four more of our shots went off, and we scrambled back to safety behind and below the hill crest. Olson shouted grenades as he pulled a pin and heaved one over the crest as far as he could, as a flurry of bullets cracked the air well over our heads. We all did the same. Then we ran down the hill trying to keep our balance. Back on the flat ground, we kept running until the hill was out of sight. That was my first well-aimed shot at a human being, and also the last shot, before which I had time to think about the life of my target. Just so you know, that's the worst way to shoot someone. Whatever my thoughts were, the only regret Ole had was that the patrol had returned without a bottle of Calvados. Sergeant Harvey Olson was absolutely right. Calvados was a necessity. Unfortunately, not provided by the U.S. Army.
Thank you so much for coming and listening to these stories. We really appreciate you being here. to listen to them. I say this every month, and I'm going to keep saying it. You guys are why this happens. When they talk about the storytelling thing happened in Chicago, all the storytelling thing that's going on, they're not talking about the people putting on the shows, organizing this. What they're talking about is you, because without you, it doesn't happen. I also like to say every month, without an audience, storytelling is extremely weird. So thank you for making it not weird this month. We are so happy that you were here for the stories. We'll be here the second Tuesday of every month. We will have 2 more months with Mr. Sussman. We cannot wait to hear more stories from you. Please, if you want to tell your stories, do it. One opportunity is Story Lab. If you sign up tonight, you'll get an email, and you're guaranteed a spot on stage. If you leave and you didn't sign up tonight, and you're like, oh, I should do it, I wish I'd sign up, just email us. How's at the show? We'll put you on the list. There's the open mics, there's all that stuff. But even if that's all too much, you're just like, I just want to share my stories, do it wherever you share your stories, with your family, with your friends, meeting new people. This is just a slightly more formal version of something we do every day and that we should be doing all the time. So tell your stories where it's right for you. Also, if we listen to each other the way we listened to the storytellers tonight, took that out of this room, I think it would make a big difference in the world as well. One more time for Allie Jackson. She's not here anymore. We got to give her part of the night. This bucket will be by the door. This show is 100% free and always will be. But everything that goes in here goes directly to creating new opportunities and making more storytelling stuff. So if you got any extra cash, it's just like bumming you out. You're like, man, I'm tired of carrying this. You can throw it in here. But honestly, your presence is more. That's what we're most interested in. Thank you so much. My name's Scott. It's been a pleasure being your host. We'll see you sometime soon. Yay.